Now it's going on the left. It's going on the right one now. All right, we're live. Good evening and welcome to another episode of Conversations Cafe. I am your host, Carl Evans, Senior Director of Operations at Home for the Day. It's my honor to bring you this episode, which we've titled Where We Go From Here, and is part of an ongoing continuation of dialogue that is largely in reflection and continued understanding from the movements and activities that have percolated and developed and really exploded across the country in the wake of George Floyd's murder. What we're looking to do tonight is largely not just really a reactionary thing. If you've ever followed Conversations Cafe since we've first been running over the last year plus, talking about the intersectionality of mental health and its impact on persons of color and the systemic deficiencies and insufficiencies is not a new topic for us. But I think there's a different really maybe a different tone that comes up when we're talking now, because there's a bit of a sea change that's happening right now. We think of something like Black Lives Matter as a formal organization or a hashtag. It's something that really started to appear in 2013, particularly after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin's murderer. And that movement spurned into consciousness the phrasing, and the formal organization is listed as founding in that time span. But if you noticed and you look back from 2019 forward, there was always this ebb and flow around Black Lives Matter. With the unfortunate reality of a Black person's death at the hands of law enforcement, you would see a sort of rising representation and visibility for the hashtag, the organization, the movement, and peoples around these linked causes. That would last for a weekend or a week or so around, yet again, another death of an unarmed individual, male or female. And there was an ebb and flow. It would rise, it would be there, it'd be very prevalent for a second, and then it would sort of drift off again. And there was another element to this, both the concept of Black Lives Matter and general movements, because obviously we understand that Black folks being killed by people with a badges didn't just start in 2014, 2013, or it's been going on for a very long time. But I think there's been a pretty specific sea change that's happened, in that if you kind of look back in pre-George Floyd instances where consciousness for Black Lives Matter as a concept, and even prior to 2013, when people would talk about Black folks and lethal endings by the hands of cops and law enforcement, the conversation was always about, is there systemic racism? It somehow always became the job of Black folks and people of color and marginalized individuals to have to say and assert that yes, there is systemic racism or there is prejudice afoot. And the way a sort of status quo, or people who want to maintain a status quo society in America, particularly, would always sort of try and look for the big doppelgangers of racism. When it comes to cops, they would say, well, was the cop hurling racial epithets, saying the N-word? Do they have Confederate flag tattoos? Are they secretly a member of a neo-Nazi organization? And if those very visible elements didn't exist, then racism somehow wasn't in the equation. And the equation was really about, what did that Black person do to trigger the law enforcement agent? What could that Black person have done to avoid bringing this violence on themselves? And if you go back and look at the tone and the trajectory of discourse, that is very consistent. That it's always, well, we don't see overt racism here, unless you're getting a sort of right on the nose, Mark Furman-esque, well, we have it on record that this person was dropping the N-word, or this person attended Klan meetings or did some sort of thing like that, then that could not be racism. But it's important for us to understand that systemic racism, if you were to distill it down and explain it to a 5-year-old, because it might be complicated to explain that race is a engineered concept, right? That might make someone's eyes roll over if they couldn't handle that. But if you distill systemic racism down, it's effectively taking prejudice and bigotry and codifying it into laws and rules. And the purpose of doing that is to create barriers of access and control people into a socioeconomic hierarchy. And in America, that has been designated for Black folks. And even though other people have been in that oppressive cycle, Black folks, have had some company from time to time. But it's first and foremost has been targeted against Black folks in America. And systemic racism does not require the perpetuators and the maintainers of it to have a prejudice bone in their body. If you think about the 4 cops who were part of the George Floyd death, what I describe as a murder, 2 of the individuals are persons of color. And that doesn't mean being a person of color doesn't mean you can't hold racist attitudes, but they didn't have to have a single racist or prejudiced idea in their minds to perpetuate and maintain the structures of systemic racism. And what I've noticed in the movements around and since George Floyd's murder have been a growing group of people who take it as a undeniable reality that there is such a thing as systemic racism. That is no longer something that has to be convinced. And when I talk about large swaths, it wasn't people of color who had to be convinced about systemic racism. Not at large, it was largely Caucasian individuals, white America, finger quotes. And law enforcement is the most visible extension of systemic racism. They're the most visible because on a day-to-day basis, they're the group of people who represent the institutions of America that one might be most likely to meet and most likely to interact with and actually be victim to as we go along. So it's not shocking that the focus needs to be on law enforcement on a day-to-day basis. But when people use the term systemic, it's important we understand that this is far-reaching. Systemic is not just law enforcement. It's laws and policies that have been put in place or enshrined in economic policy, in our education, in our healthcare, in other laws, such as the prohibition on drugs. Systemic racism isn't just the most visible and easy to detect things like segregation laws. Sometimes systemic racism manifests itself in very subtle ways and uses very coded language. So today, in talking about and moving the conversation forward and keeping it going, in order to upend systemic racism, it's important to begin to chart a path towards what is better and what can better look like. Identifying the problems is part one, but we're only really capable right now of identifying the very big visible things. But if we start to visualize and plan for what does a better society look for, what does a better system of governance and community look like, this can actually help us reverse engineer to figure out the things that we need to extract, remove, maybe abolish instead of just reform. But ultimately, what do we need to do to evolve to become a better, inclusive society that doesn't have systems that minimize and subjugate and exclude individuals? And so today we have a phenomenal panel of individuals who join us from all different walks of life, who share in being persons of color, but have their own distinct, unique voices. Because another thing that systemic racism and really prejudice in general does is it likes to create monoliths of individuals. And even though Black folks in America are raising their voice together in terms of what's wrong, what a better looks like can have a lot of different aspects to it. And people can come from a lot of different intersections on where they see things need to be better and what better will look like to them. And one of the most beautiful things that isn't celebrated enough is the diversity of the Black voice. And so today, as the episode is titled, what does better look like? Today, we're going to be joined by a phenomenal panel of individuals who want to share their thoughts on that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panel, and then we're going to have them tell you a little bit about themselves. So let's begin. Let's see. AC, can we hear you? Can we see you? AC, can we hear you? Can we see you?
What's up?
There's AC. Looking good. Looking good. All right. Angelica Taylor, can we hear you? Can we see you? Angelica Taylor, can we hear you? Can we see you?
Hello.
Hello, Ms. Taylor. Great to hear you. Great to see you. Okay. Christopher LeMark, can we hear you? Can we see you?
Yes. How you doing?
Great. Thank you very much. All right. We've got Moja Stokely. Can we hear you? Can we see you?
Hello.
We hear you. We see you. Kemdah Stroud, can we? I think we see you already. Can we hear you, Kemdah?
Hear me too. Yeah.
Perfect.
Hey,
And Mr.
everybody.
Trez, can we hear you? Can we see you, my brother?
I am here. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
I can hear you, Trez. We can't see you yet.
Let me see. How about that?
Horrific. All right, got it. All right. And then, Moja, is your video working?
I think you have the admin
Let me
control.
see. We do not want to exclude anybody.
Oh, there we go. I
Perfect.
think it was a collaboration.
Perfect. And then, yeah, and then, Kemdah, if that was you manually, okay, yeah. And Kemdah, do you have yourself manually on mute? I didn't put you on mute, did I?
Oh yeah, I did. I like do that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we weren't kind of. So thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to do a little bit around the table for formal introductions. So I'm just going to go in reverse. Kemdah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, okay, there we go. Hey everybody. So my name is Kemdah Stroud. Nice to virtually meet everybody. Shout out to Carl and Mike. Also, super shout out to Mike. The reason I am here this call is because, so basically I founded a nonprofit a year ago called Thankful for Chicago. And our mission is to create experiences that allow people to leave better than they came and create joy. So with that, we saw the need for just food resources on the West Side specifically. That's something we were thinking about in terms of just like a lot of the stores and pharmacies and stuff being closed down. Like I live downtown and it was hard for me to find groceries. So I was like, whoa, like I'm sure it's way harder, in places that are already food deserts. So that's why what brought us to the West Side. And that same morning, CPS stopped giving out food. This was last week, Monday. So that's kind of a bit of a background of how it got started. But we started the People's Free Food Program, and we've been outside on the South and West Side for the past like week and a half, just like passing out food and feeding people and giving out groceries and babies, everything, and clothes and dog food, and like literally whatever you can think of, I'm sure we're giving it out. We've helped about like 10 to 15,000 people in the past like 10 days. So it's been really, really effective. Yeah. I'm also a neuroscience student, like a neuroscientist.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Mr. LeMark.
Yes. The founder of Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health. Our whole goal is to bridge the gap between communities and the mental health space by making it easier and cooler to talk about your emotions, to be vulnerable, and to talk about your childhood or adult trauma, like without feeling like you are crazy because you have these issues, whether they are traumatic, whether they're current issues or previous. We want to create a safe space to put people on the path of healing by thinking about therapy. So our whole goal is to normalize therapy by making it safe for people to open up about their pain, their hurt, their heartbreak, and their frustration.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you so much. Ms. Stokely.
Hello. So I sit on the board of an organization called Surviving the Mic, which is a survivor-led organization. We do a lot of trauma-centered work, be it, it started as an organization meant to serve artists that also happen to be survivors of Black diaspora that were female born or identifying as female, but we more broadly serve a much wider population in all of the work that we do. I also just founded an organization 2 weeks ago called Social Practice Labs, which right now we're calling our current project Artist Made Mutual Aid. It's blown up really fast because the need is now. We were intending on launching in about a year as a social practice artist and cultural worker organization. So social justice meets art. That's the short version, with an emphasis on Indigenous and Black communities. But COVID hit and we're dying, and our communities are completely being ravaged by this disease. And then on top of a pandemic, we have this other pandemic that is happening, and people are in the streets and protesters are getting hurt but don't want to call 911. And you know, food was cut off last week from students, so we needed to deliver food, and mamas needed formula. And you know, so we've just been providing whatever we can. We've been thankful that people have been donating, but yeah, that's what we've got. We've got a core team that's going hard and about 40 volunteers. So we'll talk about that more later, I hope. Thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you very much. AC.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm a musician, and I do Beatkeepers as part of Hope for the Day, working with children and showing them how to play music. That's what I do.
Right on. Thank you, my man. Angelica.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angelica Taylor. I work in early childhood. So my purpose here today is to talk about where does it all start? And we all know that mindsets start with our children, and they form their identities, they form their thought processes, and their mindsets are influenced at even the youngest age. So talking about how do we explain what's happening in our world today with our children. I also work as an instructional professor for Illinois State University. So in that means I also get to discuss how teachers can kind of destruct the thought of children in low socioeconomic statuses. Black children are unable to learn or process information as their other counterparts, and how it is our job as teachers to ensure that our children of color are receiving the same education and receiving the same chances to grow and develop as their counterparts in the classroom. And so that's what my expertise is what I'm going to talk about today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And Trez.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Carl and Mike, who's not pictured, for inviting me on this distinguished panel. My name is Trez Pugh III. I'm the founder and CEO of Sip and Savor Hospitality Group. We are the providers of high-end gourmet coffee houses. And I have two in Bronzeville and one in Hyde Park, one at 528 East 43rd Street, one at 78 East 47th Street in the historic Rosenwald building. And the other one is in Hyde Park in the Del Prado building, 5301 South Hyde Park Boulevard. About me, it's just simple. You know, I'm an ordinary guy with extraordinary vision. You know, I'm a retired law enforcement officer. I've been in the coffee business about 15 years. And my whole thing is, our tagline is where coffee and community meet. And what I try to develop through my coffee houses is a safe space. And what I mean by that is you could come there, you could study, you can have a date, you could talk about religion, you could talk about politics, you could talk about sports. We dibble and dabble in relationships. So it's one of them places like a modern day Cheers, everybody knows your name. My whole purpose for putting this thing together, or my goal in life, was to create jobs and change communities one cup at a time. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell, bro.
That's so righteous. Thank you very much. So, you know, with all these different experiences and all the different ways that we sort of touch into the topics around our current realities and historic realities, it can be easy to sort of get lost in these conversations and figure out where we need to go. And so what I thought we would do is just sort of touch on them using this from a drop-down menu to just sort of give people's thoughts on this. Because when we talk about what does better look like, I think the first place to start with is really sort of asking each one of you, what has that sort of been like, you know, as you were invited to join this conversation? I wanted to know if each one of you could sort of take a moment. Remember, we set our own clock here, you know, so I don't need like a 2-second soundbite, but sort of if you feel comfortable sort of signing off about like what does better look like for you and the sort of intersections that you wanted to touch on with that. I'm going to do a little bit of a cheat code here. You know, I've built sort of liner notes on a lot of things, right? But one of the things that I often have thought about because of the way it sort of rushed into the current context was people sort of taking the phrasing defund the police, and me seeing a lot of people who instinctually just, yeah, I agree with that right away, but they don't seem to necessarily understand what that term literally means. And then people who have like a knee jerk, like, what? Hell no. And they may not even understand what it means. And to me, sort of thinking about like, you know, taking it down to its like simplest level, I found that, you know, I just started with like policing budgets. You know, whereas a lot of informed people are taking it, and like me wondering like, what would 1.8 billion is Chicago Police Department, you know, 3 billion is LA. I've checked some liner notes, you know, some other major urban spaces are running in between there, right? And I just wonder in Chicago, you know, where could some of that go? You know, and what would it do for folks? And so I just wanted to, that does not have to be the prompt for how you answer this, but that's sort of like one of the micro ways I've thought about it. So who'd like to maybe sort of talk about from their mindset, what are some things that you think of as a better look? You know, I hope that's not too vague. We're putting it on the spot. Did anyone have any initial attitudes about that?
I'll try to start off. You know, I don't know how old the average panel is. I'm probably one of the oldest. I don't know. I'm 57, but I remember growing up. I'm speaking from the law enforcement piece.
Excuse me. Wait. You're 57?
Yeah.
Man, black don't crack.
Don't crack, yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Right there at 30, you know, it's only 2 jumps and a hop right
No,
there.
Sorry, I didn't mean
Right there,
to cut you off.
No, when me and Chris first met, and I told him my son was almost his age, he was like, "Dude, really?"
Yeah.
So
What?
one of the things growing up in the mid 60s and the early 70s, you knew the cops that was on the street. They had beat cops. You had officer friendly that would come to the grammar school and, you know, and ask questions. They knew your moms, they knew your grandmoms. So if you was off the street, you cursing or doing something, hey, I'm gonna tell Miss Pugh, you better get your little badass back to the crib. You know, you would take off and get up out of there because you respected what we call officer friendly. It was more of a communication connection. It was more of a relationship with law enforcement. Now I think that's gone. You don't know who's on your block or who's running up in there. And most of the time they don't know who you are and don't care. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And I mean, the question you asked is really so multifaceted, but that's the piece I kind of grabbed out it as the law enforcement piece. If you want things to be better or what would better look like, you know, we got to take the road less off and travel and get out there, get out the car, get off your damn bike and walk up to some doors and knock on them, come to some picnics or some barbecues or whatever you have to do, some sporting events, and let people see you and know who you are and what you're about. And I think that's what the new, I don't know how you put it, what the new thing looks like or what it's going to take going forward. It's going to take people breaking down barriers and communicating, at least on the law enforcement piece, on both ends.
Yeah.
I respect that.
Yeah, if I can kind of jump in there for a second, this is Kemdah. I think, yeah, actually, like there seems to be like 2 separate ways to go about it. There's obviously like reform and there's obviously complete like dismantling and building of something else. I feel like what an effective method of reform would look like seems to be what was already in existence when you were a kid. I feel like nobody should be able to police a community they don't live in. You should only be able to police your zip code. I don't understand, you know, why, like there should be no reason for you to want to police anywhere that you don't live, because what, you know what I mean? Like it should be something that is for you, by you, for everybody, so everybody understands each other's role and how to work together. Now that would be like what the reform route would look like. But I think alternatively, what like a new system would look like co-creating community, and a lot of communities working together in their own ways, and then finding ways to organize within their neighborhoods to represent their neighborhood in the city level. But it looks like a lot of co-creating, it looks like a lot of community work, it looks like a lot of people working together, it looks like everybody finding their role and having to be responsible and accountable for doing that.
Yeah. You know, it sounds like to that end, and you know, think about that budget thing, it makes me think about how, and really going back to things that might have worked in communities before, we know as a fact, you know, when you talk about systemic racism, you don't have to have been racist to be supporting it. But if we think about the systematic tear down of mental health services in communities, for instance, there's probably, you know, a lot of calls that are being deferred to somebody who can only bring a gun, a taser, and handcuffs to the call, when it requires someone with compassion, patience, and an ability to bring someone, to get someone safe with the least amount of agitation possible. And that's not giving an excuse to law enforcement, but I think that somewhere in the bigger system, if law enforcement is an extension of systems, I think we're actually not doing a full justice if we think that it begins and ends with cops. You know, if we're not looking at why did public service communities fall apart? Why do we have to charge people? And I know Chicago, because of a food program that was, correct me if I'm wrong, but was initially instituted by folks like Fred Hampton, you know, why isn't that a program that is just enshrined and locked in and is immovable? And there is no beginning, middle, and end to it. It's just feeding children. Why is that not? At some level, that has to be positive for mental health and positive. Was it Christopher? Is part of your mission was you had a thing about poverty is violence?
Yeah. So one of the things that we was concerned about was after the looting happened, a lot of the stores in the area was closed, right? And so a lot of the people can't get to medicine, right? If they have like prescriptions to fill. A lot of people can't get to what's really important is fresh produce, right? And I know for myself, I had to drive all the way across town just to go to the grocery store. And so I started to think about those who were less fortunate, who may didn't have a car to get out of the community, and for the elderly. And so I wanted to find a way to feed 100 families by providing not only the fresh produce, but just basic food essentials to get people through a week. And that's just the start, right? You know, just trying to make sure people have what they need, because they can't leave out of the community or even go downtown because the city is cutting you off. So it's hard to get to fresh items.
Well, I think that contributes to something that, again, goes beyond not wanting to not acknowledge what's the most visible extension in law enforcement. But when people look at things like so-called food deserts, right, and the placement of viable and needed resources, from food to accessible ports for healthcare, for instance, I think it's safe to say that it's not necessarily an accident. It's not some Illuminati contraption that there are these things here. It's part and parcel with things like redlining. If you know, yeah. And does anyone, for maybe some of our younger viewers, does anyone want to explain what redlining is as a concept? I do too much talking. Does anyone want to jump in?
Trez, take that, AC.
No, you take it. I'm horrible at talking. I'm gonna hop on the next one. Go.
You want me to talk about redlining? So
yeah, what is the concept of redlining?
Well, basically the key.
I'm down to talk about it too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, and I'll let the sister probably go in depth. It was just a way of keeping people of color from having access to property, residences, money, loans, things that our counterparts, white people, was able to get. They would make sure that our applications or certain areas were points we couldn't get to. That's the Cliff Notes version.
Yep.
Go ahead, sister, break it down.
Honestly, okay, I think that's a pretty fair Cliff Notes version. You know, if you want to like break it down to the breakdown level, we can talk about like how property taxes fund school budgets and how, you know, lottery tickets is how schools get funded. But I think you did a pretty solid job.
Okay.
I think it's worth just bookmarking for any of the young viewers out there or white people. Perhaps just Google GI Bill and redlining one word, GI Bill, redlining. People went off, fought for your country, came back, thought they were going to get a house, didn't get a house. You were white. So I'm just putting that out there. Just Google it. GI Bill, redlining. That's all.
Googling is your friend. And that's perfect, because, and why I brought that up is because, again, it's easy for people, you know, we do not have to prove that systemic racism exists. That's, I'd like to think we are done with that.
No, we are not, which is very unfortunate.
We're done tolerating.
We as the people who are here are done with it.
We're done tolerating that someone's going to start the conversation. You know, it's not appropriate for someone on CNN or anywhere else to be like, so is systemic racism a thing? Tell us why. You know, and then you have to start from like square, it's not even square one, it's square like sub.
It's like square like, it's like, okay. So I think of things as like children all the time, right? And so when I talk about, before we can even talk about systemic racism, a lot of times I gotta have the conversation on racism in general. Like people today, and they will say, there is no such thing as racism in 2020. And I'm like, okay, so we're gonna take this back to the toddler level, right? Before we can even go into first, second grade, how we can go into systemic racism, we got to talk about the very bare minimum that it still exists. It's still among us, and people still have these beliefs, but they come into the form of, well, I can't be racist because I have their favorite line, Black friends. Their favorite line is, I have Black husband, Black colleagues, and I wear the color Black on my t-shirt. And so there's no way that I can be a racist or have racist thoughts, because it's there. I don't believe in that. And we're all God's children, right? And so when we think of it, before we can even start talking about these ideas of in the racism in these different systems that we see them in education, and we see them in our housing, and we see them in our different components, we sometimes have to even talk about, is it still among us with people? And so that's where a lot of the talk has to come. And that's a lot of, and I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, most of you all live in Chicago, correct?
I do. Yeah.
Yep.
I do not. I live 2 hours south in Bloomington, Normal. So if anybody's from Bloomington that's on here, which you guys are, because I've been blasting this all day, we are kind of like our own little bubble of a town here, where it's like you wouldn't have even thought anything happened, you know, in our little small town. Because in our small town, we had our protests, we had our marches, we had our talks, but our Walmarts were still open. Our Target got touched, but that was about it. And everybody just continued on with their day and with their life. And so we didn't have to, you know, pull our finances together to feed families, because they were able to go to the store. And so because we see that, it's almost like, did it really exist? Is it really something we're seeing? And we're being considered a red county down here. A lot of times it does get swept under the rug of, well, let's just quickly sweep it under the rug and we'll let them have their protest, but then we'll sweep it under the rug and then we won't talk about it again. And then after some weeks, it'll go away. And finally, people here have gotten to the point where like, no, it's not going away. We're gonna keep saying things, but it's just now happening.
And that might be an extension of what better looks like, is that these damn conversations are not incidentally charged anymore. Right. Like, we have to have a dead black body to justify pulling out a freaking hashtag or having any number of organizations be vocal about it. It was, as I live and breathe, if that was, I want to say a lot of things happen, but if one thing of permanence that gets set in stone for not just persons of color and anyone marginalized, but really for so-called white America, is that this conversation is at least somewhere omnipresent in their day-to-day lives. The way we have no choice for it to be an essential part of our consciousness every single day.
Right.
So kind of with that, we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but going into a different feature of the same thing is education is a place where we've seen disenfranchisement. And of course, the big visible form of racism is segregation. But even in our modern education, we know that there's deficiencies, and it might get confusing or be like seem too nuanced to talk about taxation. But I'd like to sort of hear people's thoughts on just, what is a better, more equitable public education system look like? I mean, if I threw in my 2 cents there, it'd be, I like that there's, a Black History Month, but to me that seems like it's also a surrender for not doing a better job of doing the research and due diligence to make sure the total Black contribution and the total Latinx contribution and the total women's contribution and the total LGBTQ plus contributions are in there, so that it's not just, so that American history, at the least as a history major, isn't compartmentalized between the white story and then all these other guys when it's relevant, we'll sprinkle them in. So in June, you get a little bit of this, in February, you get a little bit of this. And to me, that's a better society when the story of the book and all its brutality and all of its positives and everything is one book. And all the scabs and scars and everything, but it's one book.
Is there a community where in June we're talking about Blackness? I mean, I know about Juneteenth, but is anybody else experiencing that in school?
Oh no, I'm talking about more because of Pride Month ends up as like a
too. So I was just like, did I miss?
No, hell no.
I didn't know about Juneteenth until I was in college.
Yeah,
I didn't know a lot.
Grown as adult. Before I knew as well. I work in schools, but I work in a lot of, I'm a non-traditional educator and get brought into schools for anywhere from a day to a couple weeks or whatever to do trauma-informed programming. And I have opinions about how we should do a lot of these things. One, to piggyback on the question before, I think better looks like taking funds that we are dumping into policing and just remove every officer from every school in the nation, unless there is truly a unique and extreme dire need. Replace the officers with full-time social workers and perhaps some helpers with other very specific skills to mitigate issues of violence and mitigate, aggressive behaviors and stuff like that, which we know through studying generational trauma, this stuff can be mitigated, right? Like, we are not broken people. We just got some stuff that's attached to our DNA, just like white folks got some stuff attached to their DNA, and we just all need to work on it. So that's my thing. I feel like we need to be very realistic about the fact that we can't point a finger at young people who are struggling emotionally and in their education and in their communities unless we have therapy and regular check-ins. So like the full breadth of what social workers do, right? We need a team in every school, which I think would be about the same, if not less of a cost than we're spending on policing in schools right now. So that's my piece there. But I also think that really we are in a circumstance right now where we don't really have an option but to be honest about this country's legacy. Chattel slavery is a very unique subjugation of humans that has created a ripple effect. The fact that we experience it in a very particular and very extreme way here in the United States, we are looking right now, look at where the protests are happening. We have protests in places where like majority of the people blend into the snow. Like what is happening that like in countries that are quite Nordic, they're protesting for like the 2 people, right? It's because we create media that reflects our reality to some degree, which is problematic. What we have right now, it's getting better, but you know, and that gets projected into the world. And then anti-Blackness is a brand we've been doing a very good job of exporting, right? And so, you know, if we have any intention of doing any sort of mitigation of harm worldwide, we have to get this stuff right here because everyone's watching, everyone's learning from the garbage we're putting out, right? And so I think that like we need to bring people account that are in the education industries. We can't sit around celebrating Columbus Day anymore. We need to honor the indigenous peoples who have, you know, suffered genocide. We can't sit around going, what, 28 days is a really good amount of time to honor like 5 Black people, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
We all learned about the same 5.
And that's really where it comes from. We need to change the curriculum that's in our schools and what our children are actually being taught. We also need to look at what is the appropriate way that we can explain this to our youngest of children. Studies show that children start to learn their identity and the difference in their colors from their counterparts at the age of 3 and 4. So they are already starting to notice that my skin color is darker than yours, or you're lighter than me, and they actually start to form groups, you know, in preschool, pre-K classrooms based off who they identify with the most. And we have to start looking at what are we putting in place that we can describe equality to our children in the most rarest, simplest of forms. And then as they get older, how are we putting this into the curriculum and embedding it into the curriculum? I don't know about anybody else, but when I learned about, you know, the indigenous people or Native Americans and them and their history, I learned it through, I don't know if anybody ever played the game Oregon Trail growing up as a kid, but it's called Oregon Trail, and it's this game. Yes, it's this game. Yeah, it's this game where you have to literally create America, basically, and you have to go and it's all like, but this is all good things. We're walking the Native Americans in their look, and it was a game. So of course I'm not going to take it serious as a child, because the only way I'm learning about it is because I got free time on the computer to go play this game that told me that taking people from their land and gathering all of their food, and I get points for how much corn I can get into the basket, and I get points for how many horses I can buy. And so this is all good and this is all great, because the more I take from these people, the more points I win to get on this trail to the new land. And if you think about it in a
Cognitive-
child, yeah,
Cognitive behaviorally, we're teaching every child that has ever played that game about
that it's
colonialism.
okay.
Yeah,
Carry on.
that is okay.
Yeah, that please, this is what you're supposed to do. And it wasn't until I got older and I played and I looked at the game and I was like, oh, they still play that. And I was like, wait.
Uh-huh.
No, this is not okay. And then we also look at curriculum as far as we only talk about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, right? Potentially Coretta Scott King in there because now we're fighting for having more women be talked about, but they don't ever say what actually happened. They all just say, and Martin Luther King Jr. passed away. They don't say how he died, who actually shot him, and all of the things that come after that as well that attributed to his actual death. And so when you come as an adult and you say, people say, oh, well, Martin Luther King Jr. was for peace. And I'm like, well, your people shot him. So I don't know how to explain that to my child. So now we have to think about what is curriculum, what are the guidelines of curriculum, how we can actually break this down so children of even the youngest age can understand what it is to be equal, what it is to have equality, and what these systems look like. We need better school boards. We need more diverse school boards. We need more diverse principals. We need more diverse just anything in your curriculum, and you need more things in your education where people can say they look like me and they understand and they're telling me what I need to know for the future, and be okay with having those hard conversations with your students. They will understand and it will help them as they grow.
Here's what
And
I
we
can
need,
add to that.
oh, go for it.
Sorry, if I can add this, those are like really good points. When you think about like poverty, right? We know very early children are most affected if they live in a poverty environment, right? And so what better looks like in schools, if you know that these kids are a part of a certain demographic, you know that their parents are only able to teach and show so much.
So much.
They're trying to survive. So like the young lady said, I don't want to mispronounce your name. Is it Maja or
Mojde, like a day of the week. Mojde.
Thank you.
Mhm.
They do need like a team of social workers, a team of special counselors. And honestly, it'd be great if they was teaching basic life skills that they're probably not being taught because their parents are too busy stuck in survival mode to the basic life skills, right? And so what better looks like in school if you're actually teaching young people how to live a sustainable yet manageable life, right? And so if you're not teaching them how to speak, and as it relates to the curriculum, if we're only teaching them just a little bit of our American history, we're not teaching them anything that empowers them, that gets them confident, that makes them poised, right? Everything they're spoon feeding us as children, it's just a little bit, right? But when you think about talking about Malcolm X, what is that outcome of that? He dies.
Mhm.
Martin Luther King, what is the outcome? He dies. So you
Mhm.
think I want to grow up to be an activist? No, right? And so it's really important, like, to make sure we speak directly to our children. And what better looks like is making sure we have someone that not only relates, but they have a high level of empathy. They really care about the well-being of this child. But if you have people passively teaching our young people and they're already stuck in poverty, you're raising them to be what they are today, lost, right? And walking in with this misguided passion with not really a good outcome on life. So they're angry because you foster them and you parent them and you school them that way. And so it's really important for us to change the narrative, how we teach and empower our young people.
Mhm.
That's
And we need better.
Oh,
go ahead.
no, go on.
We need better accountability for our education system as well. The fact that I can, in my mind, think of 4 or 5 educators who have told me themselves that in their school districts, they have books that include language like Black people were indentured servants, I just saw some reactions. That's how I feel about it, right? The fact that these textbooks and like authority resources that kids are supposed to go to and learn from are giving the wrong not just the wrong information, but inaccurate in terms of history, and thus inaccurate and unhelpful to the cognitive and social and like, you know, behavioral development to young people, because every time we realize we mislearned something when we were young, it actually creates a pushback on whether or not we want to participate in our own learning.
That's true.
Right? Because if it's been a lie up until a certain point, what's the point in finishing high school, in going to university, in, you know, pursuing a specialized skill? At some point, it starts to feel like, well, I just get put in these places that don't care about me, that are telling me things that aren't true. So why am I investing the time and the energy when I could do whatever else, right?
Yeah.
And then in terms of skill building, I think we uniquely need to consider the fact that folks who grow up with relative privilege, which might be because of race or economic privilege or whatever, are not dealing with the systems in the same way. I can tell you from like a great example. When I was in university, my roommate and I had the same exact job because I referred her to the job that I had on campus. I'm Black, she was white. We both ended up in a situation where, because tuition and fees and whatever was so expensive one term, we both needed to go get food stamps. We both went the same day. We had the same time appointment. She went in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, was out. I was in there being grilled for 45 minutes to get a link card. Right? So, and this has happened in a few different times in life in various ways and for various things. And so, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, if I had been given the training, right, that when I walk into that office as a Black person, I need to bring everything, and then a little bit something extra, so that as those questions come, I'm not acting like, hold on, let me think about this for the first time. Instead, it's like, yeah, here's the copy of that. Yeah, here's the copy of that. Yeah, here's the copy of that. Right. And similarly, when we go into the health systems and, you know, university systems, it's very much the same. If you don't know what it means to ask for a medical advocate, then the medical apartheid just continues. Right? If you don't know how to ask for support in filling out your college applications when you're in high school, well, then of course you aren't going to make deadlines or whatever, because they are genuinely the process is genuinely confusing for the average child. And what we do see is that privileged kids don't even have to ask. They're just funneled into the counselor's office. The counselor goes, what five schools do you want to apply to that we're going to work on together? And great, see you later, we've done the thing, you know?
Yeah.
It's really important. And I saw AC and Kemdah, did I see your hand up? You were going to say something? But
yeah, I kind of forgot what the question was. It was like, what does a space, I guess, what does a community look like if we don't have policing? What does a community look like if we are independently taking care of each other? Something around those realms. And then with the conversation started going towards children. So what I was going to say is, just from like a neuroscientific perspective, like so we talk about like psychological racism a lot. The method that's used in that is fear. The thing that the privileged people are not as fearful as other people. So if there's a way, because when you're in a state of fear on a neurological level, your body can't think of anything else besides survival. Not even like, you can't even think to eat. You know what I mean? Like I'm feeding the people, but like ultimately, if I'm serving food at a place that someone physically is fearful of going in, they won't go. So there's other layers that you have to also think about. Like, yes, trauma looks like PTSD, but trauma looks like people are existentially existing in trauma. So those things within itself makes me, like, in general, led me to like literally study the neuroscience of joy. But like in my research, I found that like, yes, especially with the kids, yes, it's important to be honest with the kids, but also make sure you are instilling a sense of hope. because hope is literally the one sentiment and the one feeling that will make the difference between like us, like you said, like you and your white friend, did the exact same thing. You had two completely different experiences. That's like the same way, that's like almost a, you know, microcosm of like what your brain goes through of like if someone has hope and someone who doesn't have hope. That's the difference of someone having crippling PTSD to the extent that they won't leave their crib versus being perfectly fine, you know? And a lot of times that hope does come with resources because there are people cheering you on like 24/7. So it's important to like just be mindful in your small interactions with everybody, instill hope in people, because that's the only way that people will physically and mentally on a neurological level be able to even fathom keeping going on.
It's critical to hear. Thank you for putting that in there. AC, you had something you wanted to jump in there about?
Just real quick, like there was the excuse me, like the whole you know, the Black History Month, and then that's it. I think there should be more teaching in those predominantly white schools, if you will, not just Black History Month, but all the time. It needs to be mixed in. And like I said, the reason why I say this is because I went to predominantly white schools, middle school, high school. And probably by about, I don't know, 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade, I was like, why do I just hear about Martin Luther King Jr. and Harriet Tubman? Why is that? You know what I'm saying? And like, so by the time 8th grade came around, like, Mom, Dad, what's up? Like, I'm getting bored. Like, there's got to be more. You know what I mean? So they would start telling me things. Talk to your grandparents. They'd tell you stories. Start reading books, you know? And it got to a point, true story, by the time junior year hit, I was just fed up with it. And it's the same lesson. And I acted out. And I was like, why don't you tell them about Marcus Garvey and the Black Panther Party and how this went down? And, you know, gone. Immediately kicked out of class, suspended for a week, because I feel like I spoke up over the teacher when they're just telling these kids the same thing. It's like, you're not really telling anyone anything. It's like, teach them what we all went through, you know? Like, for all these protesters, like, not trying to get all weird and racial or whatever, but a lot of these white people, if you will, out here protesting had no idea what happened back in the 60s, if you will, when they were letting dogs out on us and spraying us with fire hoses. Like, they're like, oh, that didn't happen. It's like, look it up.
They're not even aware that 2 minutes ago, someone probably was denied a job because they had natural hair.
Yeah.
So,
down in Bloomington,
let alone the dogs and the fire hoses or the water hoses, right?
Yeah.
Someone actually drove their motorcycle through the protest that happened down here. So these things happen. And when we talk about why we don't see it, I think a lot of it is because those teachers would then have to go into the deeper explanation of, this is it, this is what it is. And it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. That, you know, if I am a white teacher in front of all of my Black students or my white students who don't quite understand, that is a very difficult conversation to have, to say, at a point in time, the person to your right or the person to your left was not even seen as a human. We weren't seen as, forget being seen as equal counterparts. We weren't even seen as an actual, forget race, a human. So we talk about people always wanting to say, well, we're just all a part of the human race. Well, for a long time, I was property. So you could buy me just like you could go to IKEA and buy a couch. You could go to your nearest place and buy a person. That is a hard conversation to have. So then the question becomes, if this is the expectation that we want our teachers to have these conversations, while they are in their education systems, how are we teaching them how to have those conversations with those students? Because if we want to build the curriculum that's going to actually be in the schools, we have to be able to equip all the teachers, the Black teachers, the white teachers, the Mexican teachers, everybody, to when they get to that point and they feel that lump in their throat that they're about to have to say that dogs were released on people, how to swallow that lump and tell the truth and say what happened and break it down to them. In curriculum, we teach that curriculum is taught in phases. So there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and it goes through your different quarters. So everyone wants to just lump in Black History Month and teaching about Black history only in February. But realistically, if you want to teach about history, the history of America as a whole, that's in like your phase 1 lesson planning, because we were brought here in that moment and in that time. So it goes beyond this is what happened in phase 2 of Black History Month. It was no, after we were slaves, then we didn't even know we were free. And then once we were free, we had to still work a land for meager pay. And then you have to talk the idea of sharecropping. What did sharecropping look like? Okay, now that we have learned the idea of sharecropping, how did, when we realized that we weren't going to be able to get our services for free, now we started to jail Black men for petty things so that they could work our land for free, because it says that you are free unless you commit a crime. So now just merely walking down the street being Black is committing a crime. And I get to take you to jail and you get to go back to that land you were just freed from and work it. So that is a part of all of it, teaching what is real. Swallow that lump in your throat, tell the truth, tell them what they really need to know, because that will begin to change their mindset about their counterparts. They'll realize that it goes way beyond just when I was brought into this earth, right? So.
And I think that part of it is also like, so many parts of our education actually could incorporate sort of not only the truth of America, but also how we behave on a global scale, and sort of reproduce what we've done in terms of slavery and other subjugation and other colonial behaviors and so forth. Like, easily math class could have, the word problems could just be related to sharecropping. Easily we could take English class could actually have a focus that brings in Black literature from various eras. This is not a difficulty. Like, if we're gonna try to cover a lot of ground that needs to be covered, it's not that hard if you just spread it into every bit of education, as much as we need to spread like trauma-informed practices into every bit of education. And frankly, educators need to be forced to do a minimum of a monthly professional development that is related to race, and I'm going to very problematically say difference, right? Because we don't do it well, right? We are most trained to misbehave with difference, most trained in America, right? But if we actually take the time and have guidance and support from people who are experts in this thing, and it is fundamental to being an educator, we can do a lot of change just by training educators,
That's the complexity though, right? They can do a lot, but the struggle with me is that you don't want to, right? I mean, because you can. I'll make a very elementary point, right? And I know there's layers to this, but when the pandemic happened, we saw a lot of free stuff. We were just getting free stuff, whether it was forgiven, whether you could ride the bus for free, whatever, right? It was just tons of things happening as the world sort of slowed down. And even in that, it was like, wow, okay, well, we can offer these things if we wanted to, right? And we just don't. And like, that's the difference between systemic, which means it's intentional, Or the other part is, well, we don't have the resources. Well, we know they have the resources. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and I didn't understand why private schools made more money versus the public schools. It doesn't make any sense when you think about where the money's supposed to come from, right? And I know, Kemdah, you talked about the lottery and things of that earlier, right? So they're disproportionately putting resources in certain areas to keep a certain group of people crippled. So of course, I can put more money and resources in the school to train our schools, but I will only empower people that I'm trying to keep down a certain way. You know, I remember like in grade school, and I don't know about you, but I grew up in the 80s, right? And I remember having security guards in every corner of the school, in the entry, as we were leaving and during lunchtime. And we were all in lines. And now that I'm older, that looks sort of jail-like, right? And so if you're not empowering our students and you're giving them the bare minimum education, and then you're teaching them to just behave a certain way, what are you setting them up for, right? You're not setting them up to feel empowered, to walk with a certain confidence in and poise and certain understanding. They're taught to behave a certain way, and if not, there's a problem, right? And so, yeah, systemic, or I don't have the resources. I'm going to lean towards the fact our schools, the way they are, is because they're choosing to be that way because it's a part of the systemic process or the systemic oppression that has been placed upon our community, whether it's Black, brown, or poor in general. And so what better looks like the young lady said, we need to go in and retrain the whole school from the principal on down before we can even begin to retrain our students. And then if those teachers can't relate, don't want to move, don't want to build, you're supposed to pull them out those schools if you really want to change the mindsets of our children.
Yeah. Carl, just real quick. I want
Yeah.
to say something, man. I didn't talk much of that. That was a great conversation, man. That was just enlightening. But what I would say is this, and I'll be brief. I have this saying that you deserve what you tolerate. And I guess if we tolerate the way the education system is, we deserve it. Now, that don't mean we can change it right away. But I said that today, say this, sometimes we try to use logic with illogical people. That's one of the most frustrating things ever. And I'm sure all of you done had friends or somebody, you could give them analogies, you could give them examples of how you failed doing it a certain way. You try to give them the best advice possible. But once someone's mind is made up and they're grown, they got power and influence and money, you're wasting your time. So I said all that to say this, an educational system and all that, can it change? Yes, but it's going to take people of color with money to come in and say, hey, we need to put a board in. This is going to be the curriculum. Because sometimes I don't even know if the teacher know our history, to be honest. And if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
They
So
don't.
they
Kemdah,
That's
thank
why
you for sharing that.
getting invited. Like, can you
And I saw,
fill in the gaps here?
Yeah.
I'm going to jump over to Kemdah because she's had her hand up for a second. And she wanted to jump in here.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, we were talking about, I don't remember what we were talking about, but I remember what I wanted to say. Basically, I was saying, like, don't forget that, like, we live in a system that was literally, like, this America was a colony of Britain that seceded for capitalistic purposes. This entire country, an entire system runs on classism. Capitalism does not function if classism does not function. It is literally the obligation and responsibility of educators to bear truth and spread truth in the best way digestible. That is literally their purpose. There is no reason for anybody to go into education if they are not going to prepare themselves to do that work, because that is literally the main purpose
That's your job.
of their work.
There you go.
And that's, inside of like the content that's delivered to students and understanding, the need for financial restructuring of how that works, which are all part of, the biggest thing that has to happen. And I would like to consider me an optimist, but nothing of an institutional policy shifts without a social policy first, driving towards those goals. If we don't want to be childish and think that with good wishes and catchphrases, things will change. It has to be sustainable. And I understand where cynicism comes from. I don't ever dismiss or belittle someone who has cynicism about the so-called methodology and practices of voting. I don't blame anyone for thinking, for knee-jerk instincts, say, well, it's all bunk, it's all BS, I don't blame anyone who can hold on to those kind of views at any given point in their life. The brutal reality is, though, is that that vote can do something to change. It doesn't by just putting a ballot in. It means vetting and getting people who are the real deal to be up there. And one of the nastiest parts of mass population voting is that, you know, a quick way you can define liberalism, for instance. Liberalism is not a left-wing or right-wing thing. It's the privilege to choose a position by your convenience and cost to yourself. You know, so you're with this movement because it works for you. You're against this because you don't move. And you get liberalism from insulation. From the less something impacts you, the easier it is you can sit back and make your decisions on whether it's convenient or costly to you. And the quickest way.
I don't want my computer to die.
No, I feel.
I don't want you to think I'm running off.
And one of the things that bring up, regardless of whatever your political persuasions or however you were going to choose to vote is one of the quickest ways to tell whether you enjoy the privileges of liberalism or not is if you view things like elections in America as a nuisance or part of a grander, bigger war. Because those votes, without over-dramatization, can be life and death. And if you don't necessarily view it that way, I'm not judging you for not viewing it that way, but congratulations, you self-identified, you know, kind of in the spectrum of where you might be. If you're like, it doesn't matter who's in there. Well, if certain recent turnouts haven't told you that that two people aren't the same, and the brutal thing is that in war, there's only victory or loss, and loss is always lethal and brutal. And the shittiest thing in war and conflict is sometimes you don't always pick who the leaders are going to be. But here's where I'm going with that. When we think about education system and a better education, I think about how the disproportionate punishment of kids of color, for instance, you know, the early expulsions and general behavioral disturbances. And I think about a system that's, you know, the American education system is what? Inherited from the Prussian education system, which was a system designed to create an effective nationalist, militarily ready candidate. And, you know, maybe some of that's washed out, but the system of classes and times and getting in lines and being punctual and all these other things and part of that compliance, whether we think of a grand reform that has a more open system or not, when I think of social policy, if we just made it a point that we set a priority on representational folks, when you're talking about, you know, school boards and teachers, those two things alone can dramatically improve
absolutely
experiences. But it won't be done if we don't reconfigure how we're financing and funding. And I'm sure everyone saw it, but one of the tweets that really drove home for a lot of my white friends was when they heard, and I go back to this thing I talked before, when they heard defund the police, that again scared the ish out of a lot of people that I know, because
they were like, we can't get rid of the police. And I was like, pause. That's not what they said.
Yeah, but you know what tweets I'm about to reference, right? When folks, and it wasn't just any one person, and I don't want to steal the thunder of somebody, you know, if there's one particular person who coined it first, but someone who's like, don't defund the police, they say, as education services are continually defunded and everything. And I think it's systemic racism. We don't have enough
time.
Right, like it's easy to think that these are like big, massive systems of which we don't control. And you know what the dirtiest secret in all of America is, that maybe they really want all of us Black folks and all citizens to forget, is that this really is a mountain built by the hands of men and women. It's a system that, You know, anyone, I'm just sounding an asshole here, but anyone who says the American system is broke is wrong. Now, even if you have found yourself saying it, anyone who's ever said the American system is broke is wrong, because this system, from slavery to after slavery, has worked flawlessly. It has been manipulated and contorted to serve the interests of people who are wishing to manipulate and contort this mother trucker. And I think the thing that scares a lot of people the most is that if we decide we want to be contorting this mother trucker, look how fast things can change. Because, you know, Minneapolis talking about they're going to defund the police department. I got to tell you, even I was shocked to read that, like, holy crap. But, you know, a bunch of people saying we're not going away. It's easy to forget the power of the human voice. And that's probably part of the systemic thing, is like they want us to, Trez, you said it, man. I got to put you on the spot. What'd you say?
What, a while back? Before
about moments.
Moments or a movement? Which one?
One, just give me all that.
You got the moment or the movement. You deserve what you tolerate. I got all kind of Pughs.
Yeah, that moments and that the difference between a moment and a movement. And I think that that's the thing people want us to forget, is that, like, if they can just make these moments, then we can endure it. You know, let them have their protests, and then we'll go back to status quo, as some of you were saying earlier. But a movement scares the ish out of people in the beginning. Yeah. It might sound like LA being like, hey, we'll cut 3% of our budget. That'll shut them up. And then people will be like, wait. We just did the math. That's some bullshit. Like,
and I'm glad you kind of brought that up, just to jump in, that moment of movement. You remember when Sandy Hook, all them kids got massacred, and Obama cried on TV, and it was just heart-jerking. They said they about to do something about these damn automatic weapons. Yeah. And I was a federal agent at the time. I was like, they ought to get, nobody needs a weapon that shoots 100 rounds in a minute. You don't have to shoot at a deer that many times. That was a moment. You see how you don't hear nothing. Them kids got massacred, bro. Massacred. Everybody was like, this is just horrific. Gone. You don't hear nothing about it no more. A moment.
Oh, it's so true, man.
A moment. Think about that. Go back to that time when the president cried on national TV. He couldn't believe it. They was like, oh, something's about to be done. Something's about to be done. Nathaniel Johnson was done. Not a damn thing. So when I said movement about what old boy, the reason I think this may be a movement, and time will tell,
right?
When you see people in Idaho, or you see people in rural areas that ain't never raised their voice about anything, out there clowning that. And I think because of the way it was shown and done, they finally saw it with their own eyes instead of believing somebody saying this is happening. To see it for 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute, 5 minute, 6 minute, 7 minute, 8 minute, and some change. This dude beg and scream for his fucking mom.
Yeah, man.
If you didn't have a heart then, something is definitely wrong with you.
Well, and this particular video is unique in that we don't usually see the person's who's passing's face.
Right.
And so, you know, we even though there's young science that is starting to prove that white folks can't distinguish whether or not we're genuinely smiling or whether or not we're angry or content or whatever, we still can see the face of a person losing their life. And that is evident the whole video. There's no question, right? Even if you can't closely, deeply see the very nuance of this man's face, you can see his body and see the general situation here. That, and if you are a human being, right, you know you have a body and you have a general situation that if you were under the knee of a man with that much of his body, right, just delivering its weight, you would probably die too.
Yeah.
You know?
And Carl, I just want to give a disclaimer. I don't want, for those white people that may be out there listening, this is not a pro-black, anti-white thing. My son-in-law is white. I'm just going to tell you. But what it is something that deals with the human part of all people. Right. It's just that we've been dealing with it exponentially more than anybody else. And it's just been thrown out. Now I'm a cop, was a cop. Imagine before the cell phone video, bro, what's done transpired.
Hold on.
Think about that.
Mhm.
He reached for my gun. Oh, he tried to, you never, paperwork done. The brother that was jogging, I got so many names, but I can't think of his name. A month later, when the video came up, is when they started doing something. They had pushed that up on the rug, bro. That was done.
I mean, yeah.
Breonna Taylor's case is still, it was just reopened and investigated. She was sleeping.
Sleeping.
I'm really trying to figure out what is it there to investigate
and no,
there.
not warrant. She and her boyfriend did not know officers of the law
was
were in
going
there.
on. She was asleep. I really want to know what is there to investigate on someone who was not coherent at the time where you decided to kill them.
Yes.
It's just,
There's-
that's a whole nother, I mean, we could put a whole nother segment on that. I'm gonna just shut up because
No. It's all necessary, right?
no,
I
it
feel
just
like
bothers
that's
me.
a very, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it really bothers me because I've been on both ends of, you know, being a black man before I was a federal agent and some of the stuff I had to deal with. And even as an agent, without them knowing that I was an agent, being pulled over and, you know, the little smart ass remarks and all that until they find out who I am, and then it's different treatment. But the only point I'm trying to make here is for all those listeners that may be out there is, for so long we've been saying, oh, they just complaining. It can't be that bad. No, you know, oh, it's just, they just always, this instant here, the reason it done caught fire the way it is, they actually saw it for the whole amount of time. And it's been all over. When you got people in London, Germany, South Korea, nobody knew this dude, man. Nobody. They know him now. He's like the modern day Emmett Till. He's the modern day Emmett Till. And I'm just hoping this movement keep going because I'm getting some shirts made. I'm telling you already. It's going to be, we sip to you. And they name's going to be all over it, bro. And it ain't them trying to make money. All the money probably going to go to mental health. But I ain't going to let nobody forget, bro. I'm not going to let nobody forget. I'm done.
I was just going to say Breonna Taylor's case is a very, 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 very good example of why not only we melanated people need to get involved with like calling DAs and calling our representatives and just like flooding letters to you know, chiefs of police and so forth. But you know, in this moment, there are people worldwide protesting and people in suburbs that would avoid at all costs, shut their door, close the window shades, and wait until it passes, that are out in the streets, right? This is an unprecedented situation in which, for someone who we can definitely say was not being violent towards an officer or evading arrest because she was asleep in her bed, right? The fact that that case needed to be opened up, needed to be reopened is madness. But then the only way that it got opened up was because hundreds of thousands of people effing flooded all of the municipal people and offices. We shouldn't have to do it. It's a waste of our intellect, our time, our energy. You know, during that time, I could be stretching or having a glass of water. But instead,
I gotta get on, use my free minutes, use my unlimited minutes with AT&T and call you.
Exactly. But then on top of that, imagine if only melanated but Black diaspora were paying attention. Our letters would not be enough. It's only because right now, because this video has the world upset, that we can go, okay, great. While you're upset, also text
Remember
this
these
number to get onto a petition. Also write this letter. Also make this call. Also, you've been locked in your house because of COVID. You got time, right?
Yeah.
Like
That's
this
really
is a unique situation, and it can't stop. It's the only way we create this important thing. Okay, y'all. I'm not a lawyer. My dad was a depressive lawyer, so I went to the legal library enough as a young person, sat in courts enough as a young person, started going for funsies. I figured something out. Our law in this country is not about letter of the law, though there are laws which they follow to the letter, and they usually have to do with all of this melanin, right? But our law functions on precedent. So if you have a Black man who does get convicted and goes to jail, every Black man that stands before a judge is that much more likely to be convicted and go to jail, and thus the next one even more, and the next one even more. Similarly, if we don't hold officers accountable for unlawful brutality and they keep getting off, that's precedent. If one gets off, then the next one, there's no case to go, hey, this one didn't get off, so there's precedence to have justice, right? And so we need to create precedents. The only way precedents will happen if there's enough pressure on these institutions to remind them we're watching and we're not ready to shut up this time.
If we're talking about what better looks like, I mean, I think what better looks like today is everything to her point. We do need more pressure, and I applaud like all the people who are standing up for us, because I always say, if you're African American in this country and they're continuing to kill us, to wrongfully throw us in jail, there is no country that comes to our aid. You know, there's no one to protect us, right? And so it feels good in this moment. And like Trez was saying earlier, you know, I hope also that it's not just a moment, it's a movement, to see all 50 states and several people across the globe fighting for us, screaming Black Lives Matter. That means so much. And I watched this comedian talk about, yo, matter is like the bare minimum, right?
Yeah.
It's like matter, right? Right? It just, we matter, right? And so if it was just all Black people calling the police, they wasn't hearing our voice before, right? So they're not going to hear our voice alone now. So it matters that we have white allies. It matters that we have other people screaming for us. Because honestly, that's the only way laws will be changed. That's the only way they're going to open up old cases and like fire some people and really change some laws. Because at the end of the day, it's been a lot. And to go back to watching this man die from every angle, like watching him lose his life, I think that just pricked the human heart, right? And then the fact that he screamed out to his mom, I think that pricked, you know, and that really touched some people from a human standpoint, right? And when you looked at that, and then now you can say, man, they do this to Black people often. And I think it just finally resonated with some people. And I think timing is everything. I believe in God. I believe in timing was everything, right? We all had time to feel our feelings out. We wasn't distracted by the 9 to 5, the normal hustle and bustle. It was zero distractions, right? We all sort of had to sit at home and watch this play out over and over and over again. So I believe that it was just time. So I believe that it's a movement. I hope that it's a movement, because we really need to change like some laws substantially right now. Like,
and I'd like to jump in here for a second and just, you know, one of the things that cycles around with everything here that's really interesting to me about the movement and movement versus moment stuff is a critical, there was a committed and conscious strategy around, you know, when we talk about systemic racism or whatever, like there was a conscious structure to how it's applied. And during the slavery era, and for large parts of the immediate post-slavery moments in America, there was basically a propaganda machine that framed the African American, the Black human being, as basically chattel, not just as we principally describe chattel slavery, but that this was a low intellect, hapless human being who actually benefited from the guidance of the plantation boss and whatnot. And as soon as slavery is upended and all that good stuff, there was a new narrative put in that was part of the control. And it was not an accidental narrative. It was a way in which to shape systems that they needed social policy to back up. And that was fear. The central shaping of the African-American identity post-slavery in America was one in which white America needed to be afraid of the criminalness, the badness of the African-American, the inherent innateness of that. And segregation followed along those lines. And there's even Black individuals who adopted the belief of that segregation and of that badness and think of themselves as secondary folks. You know, I think in underappreciated, you talk about educational things, I think a very underappreciated concept is, you know, James Brown's I'm Black and I'm Proud. And I don't want to overstate or understate a thing, but, you know, saying that I'm Black and I'm proud is not something that was perpetuated in a lot of literature or pop culture about the Black experience prior to that. And one of the things I think about with George Floyd, and this is part that's angering and frustrating, is this is a Black death that the counter narrative could not get framed into the potential of danger. He was handcuffed. There were 3 other cops around. The knee on the neck could be unequivocally excessive in a place where there's videos, I forgot, it brutalizes me that I can't remember his name at this moment, and that's because there are so many names. But I think about the gentleman in South Carolina who they have on video in which the gentleman runs away and the cop unloads his clip on the man running away. Wow. And
just like Laquan McDonald too.
Yeah.
And you know, and even Laquan McDonald, like, you know, and it's on video, but I think about that because there's always the narrative, well, he was rushing, he was doing something. And that's the way, anytime you go back to any sort of incidents in which Black lives are dying by a hand with someone with a badge, like I talked about at the very start, unless they've got the easy to identify red flag, unless they've got a Klansman tattoo or something that lets white America be like, oh, okay, racist, that's a bad one. None of that's there, then the dialogue goes to, well, what did they do? And right. George Floyd, unfortunately, and literally, it could literally be the not handcuffs could have made this an experience in which people are like, well, you know, you don't know, you never know, he could run away, he's a big guy, you know, Blacks, you know, you never know, you know what I mean? And so that's part of it. I think that, Trez, when you were talking about, you know, I don't want to scare white people, but sadly enough, I think this is a situation in which we're finding a large swath of white America are evolving past the be afraid of Black people narrative. At least the ones who want to be allies. I'm not saying everyone's come full, but I think that's my sort of intimation on it. But
yeah, but you know how some people, even the way we present it, the way they receive it is always different. So sometimes to give a disclaimer, I mean, we all smart people in talking and just talking about something that bothers us. But you said something, and I'll be brief because I know Angelica wanted to say something. You know, being in law enforcement, once the threat is over, that's it. When you got a guy with his hand in his pocket and his knee on somebody's neck with 2 other people, this guy was no longer a threat. Right. And the fact that everybody, could you imagine being one of them bystanders watching and screaming at this guy and you can't do nothing? And to have another attorney, I don't know if you know, on CNN, one of the other attorneys said, well, why didn't the crowd do something?
Right, yeah.
So that you can shoot me?
An idiot. They supposed to rush these police officers with weapons. Then it would have been a massacre. We was overtaken by a crowd of angry Black folks. So, you know, it's just so much, and I hate even talking about it, but I want to say this, and I'm going to shut up and let everybody else talk. A lot of white people are calling, and I know you guys probably have friends, what is it that we can do? We feel your pain, and they say, you know what I think you can do? And it's just coming from me, and I'm going to give it to you straight, no chaser. Do those things that make you uncomfortable. When you're around some of your racist ass friends or your friends said an N-word, check them. That's foul. You shouldn't be saying that. But a lot of people won't do it. If you see somebody doing something to a Black person, say, stop, it's wrong. Because I'm gonna give you a good example. If you're a good friend of somebody and you got friends that tell you stuff you wanna hear and you got friends tell you what you need to hear. I done lost many of what I thought was friends when I said, hey, bro, that shit you did the other day was foul. And you should, man, you ought to be supporting me. I tell you what, if you really feel that way, you got me mixed up with somebody else. Because what you did was not only illegal, it was unethical, and you don't have a moral compass. I don't have a problem telling somebody that. What they're gonna have to do, if you're listening, is take the road less off and travel. I don't care if it's your husband, your daughter, your best friend, girl, the way you've been doing shit lately, don't sit good with me no more. You know, I've seen Jesus, or whatever you want to tell them. I've seen the light. This is no longer cool. That's what you got to do. And that's a difficult thing to do for somebody for so many years. And there's some of them that don't like what their friends say. They sit up there and just, oh, it's just foul, and they cringe. Don't cringe. Raise up. I will no longer sit here and
swallow that lump. Swallow that same lump.
Because I mean, me and Chris is cool. If I'm sitting somewhere and people putting bad mouth on Chris, I'm gonna say, stop right now. That brother ain't got nothing but love for me. So I'm gonna lead this conversation. Because I don't want to be the one when y'all start talking. Yeah, all of us, me and Trez and all of us, we was dogging old boy. No, you won't be able to say that. They're going to say, Trez got up, deuces. I can't be around this. It takes character to do that. So you want to do something? Do that when you at a big white party and everything, and somebody said the nigger or something. You're like, oh, hold on. Don't say that word in front of me. I don't like it. And if they give you shit, leave. It's got to start somewhere. Do something difficult, tough. Take the road less often traveled. That would be my advice.
Miss Taylor?
That's real.
It's really weird to hear you call me Miss Taylor. I was just gonna say it really bothers me, but it doesn't surprise me when we talk about these kind of situations, because there are still people who are saying he shouldn't have died like that. But my mom always taught me that if you have to put a but after what you're gonna say, whatever you say after that but is gonna negate what you just said. So for people saying, I was watching, y'all know, best friend Candace Owens, that's our girl. And she said, yes, he should not have died like that, but he had a record. No, he shouldn't. No, the officer shouldn't have had his knee on him, but, you know, and it's like, I would much rather respect you if you say what you truly feel, and we can have a conversation as to why that is a problem and why I feel like I feel and like you feel like you feel. But don't come at me with any buts. Because once we start putting those, but if he would have just, but he should not have ever, but if they were going to, because tell me what was the but with Ahmaud Arbery? But if he should not have continued to mind his business and keep and run, what was the but with Breonna Taylor? But if she had have just what?
There will never be, yeah, you play that game, I mean, there will never be a qualification for it.
Right. So now you're trying to say that their deaths were justified with a but. And that is where the conversation with a lot of people are saying, if you go on Facebook now, you'll have white people with their knees on each other saying, there's no way that this could have actually happened. Look at me demonstrate as to why. So he should not have done it, but did he really? And that's the issue. That's the problem that we're seeing today, that as much as we're saying Black Lives Matter, we need to defund the police, there are people that are still in this world who believes that every single thing that has happened is okay.
You know what, sister? I'm going to jump in, and you're never going to change that small percentage.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's appalling. It's crazy.
Because they have a different makeup, a different DNA, and they're just different. And my suggestion to all you guys, not that I know everything, and it's rare that I give advice, when you find yourself engaged in a heated conversation with some person that is trying to justify what happened, you have to be the adult and be the intelligent person to excuse yourself out
to
of
disengage.
Remember what I said before. You can't use logic with an illogical person, and you can't use rationale with an irrational person. And I love your analogy about but. because when you apologize or something, it should be straight. You know, you're in a relationship, I'm sorry, you know, I smacked the hell out you, but you shouldn't have said that word. No, I shouldn't have put hands on you. That's it, that's all. So if you want to help your psyche, don't get into an argument with some of these people, because you will want to choke them and hurt them.
Yeah.
I did a post on Facebook about that. Find the bigger person and say, you know what?
I think the people that feel the most, I mean, certainly a white supremacist or someone who just is willing to exact direct violence is someone that I feel afraid of, sure. But really the people that make me heavily engage with my fear are the people in the middle that actually relatively have a decent conscience and generally would believe themselves to be good people, don't believe themselves to be someone that would like support a violent system. Those are the folks that actually scare me the most, because they're the ones voting for our judges. They're the ones participating in our systems that continue to perpetuate harm to young people. They're the ones deciding whether or not, maybe, yes, no, certain systems do get funded or not funded. And they're also the ones that are in the periphery of certain situations where someone is now going to be tracked towards wellness, or really tracked not towards wellness if they're in the medical system or whatever. Like, we need those people. We need those people to get it right. And that's the challenging part. I think getting folks who are actually like moldable.
In the fence.
Get right. Say again?
Not on the fence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if I can contribute to that, I mean, again, and I don't expect anyone to adopt like my use of the phrasing of liberalism or anything like that, but like, you know, we were talking about like education systems, and I think like that makes me think of when they do talk about Martin Luther King, they'll mention like the year he died, but they won't talk about what he was marching for that time, you know, about the pension strike. They'll give you letter from Birmingham, but they won't give you his notes on, you know, Tolerant America. And there's a very long, distinct history of like the biggest, this sounds really jacked up to say it, but the biggest impediment for Black and marginalized progress is actually the tolerance of a certain majority here. You know, there was never more than 18% of openly declared pro-abolitionists ever elected to Congress pre 1861. Okay, there were a lot of people in the North who thought slavery was morally repugnant and it was a terrible thing, but they could go on waking up and going to bed thinking those things, but tolerating the existence of slavery. Until slavery started killing their own people in the 1850s in different conflicts from state expansion, right? You know, you get to segregation and Jim Crow laws and underwriting all of it, mass lynchings and systemic lynchings, and it's all repugnant and horrible to a lot of people. But you don't see, you know, white America in mass is not joining this movement in 55. They're not sitting there at the counters. They're not there on the buses. They really get involved in 63 when it's their kids on the Freedom Ride buses joining in and getting hosed and knocked silly, along with Black folks who've been doing it for 15, 20 plus years, right? And that's kind of the frustrating reality around this, is like getting the whole of America beyond just the marginalized people involved. It does take shaking loose. And I think one of the things that we can look at is what does better look like, is that it shouldn't have to take so much freaking convincing to get people to be as radicalized as the people who have to experience it. Because one of the most abhorrent things of systemic racism is normalization. And it normalizes the abhorrent. The fact that for millions of us, we wake up every day knowing that when we step out of our house and shit, even in our residence, we can be in close proximity to a lethal interaction with someone because they have a badge. And there's other situations too as well. But for a whole nother group of people, that's not the same thing. And for the scores of people who don't have that same day-to-day fear, they know that that disparate experience of fear can exist for millions of us and still go on with their day-to-day being like, all right, it's fine. What's on Netflix? What am I going to go eat on Friday? I think about it. This is a really, really weird situation happened right in the first weekend of George Floyd protests that you couldn't have scripted it better. LA, New York, Chicago, and Miami. I had 3 friends in Chicago who were all young parents, 2 friends in LA, 4 friends in New York City, and one friend in Miami, all of them with kids under the age of 3. When the protests turned into the violent phase, where there was comp-generated violence, and unfortunately, in the looting, which is not peaceful protesters, when the looting started, it was brought to my attention by all of them, not even knowing any of them, that they felt so unsafe that they egressed to a parent or trusted family member's home in a suburb. They left their downtown urban spaces, no matter how close in proximity they were to the protests or not. They left the urban space and went to the suburbs. And I don't even know what to make of that. I don't even know what the narrative is, but like, it was one thing when I heard 2 people tell me within 48 hours of the things that were happening, but literally by the Tuesday of that, after that weekend, by like June 2nd, I said there were like 9 different stories, and I'm like, what the? And I don't know what to make of it, but I just think about this idea of like, well, what if you stayed? Or, what if you lived with an omnipresent fear of danger in your midst, and you didn't? I don't have a narrative to bring there, but I always think about like agency and support for this cause. You've already hit it on the head, but imagine, what a better might look like is that we no longer have to so forcefully snap so many people who aren't directly impacted by our lived experience to get in the game. I think about, and I guess I just brought up that suburban flight story just because it's prevalent, but it's also at a smaller level. I'm absolutely shocked, and maybe this is part of the education thing. I'm absolutely shocked by how many people have suddenly discovered James Baldwin. I'm like, yo, like the man been the righteousness, you know what I'm saying? But like, and I love it. See, I don't want to shun people for doing that, but there's still a little part of me that's like seeing like my Caucasian folks like getting super woke and like, yo, Carl, have you ever heard of the pin drop speech? I talked to you about that real quick. And I'm like, cool, man. I'm glad you like it. That's awesome. Keep going.
Right.
That's a start. Right. Like, right, it's a start.
Right.
But, and I think that's important. Like, I don't know. That's a little bit of a word salad, but that's where I'm going with all that. So, and look, so, there's never going to be a perfect conclusion to any of this. No. I kind of think, I want to just keep doing this. I'm going to set up. Would y'all be interested in coming back again?
For sure.
See, I pushed off. Yeah, we pushed off a whole bunch. We advanced book these things so we can invite people and stuff. And we've pushed off a lot of shows that I don't, without apology, like, things that are important to talk about. But I felt like in the timeliness of you got to stand up and do what you got to do when you can do it any way you can get it done. And I want to make more time for us to come back and chew on some more things. I think we touched on great stuff, but there's never a limit in where, it's utter stupidity to think like you're going to get it all in one take. But, I am so honored by your insights and by your voices. And I think that's also very important that people it's part of the racism module to just group us in as one big other. And, that's an internal, we have our own fights to have, Blackness. True Blackness gets challenged. You challenged by your diction, by the tone of your skin, the hair, and how you gonna manage and maintain and keep it, and all that kind of stuff. And that's a whole nother thing.
Yes.
We inherited it from colonial prejudices as well, right?
Absolutely.
So. And
I think what we have to, because I have to, scoot here in a minute, but I just want to be the one to, kind of encompass all of this together and say, your mental health in this time is so important. You cannot fight. You cannot make those calls. You cannot write those letters if you are mentally exhausted and unstable to be able to write them coherently to make a change. For me, I could not watch the video. And I mean, just even getting a snapshot of the face was enough for me to break down and cry. So even watching all 8 minutes of it, the trauma that would be brought up in me, I couldn't handle it. And I knew that. And so I don't want people to feel bad if they did not watch the video in its entirety. I don't want people to feel like they have to be a part of the movement. Know that it's okay, that even if you just understand encompass the idea of what happened, that is enough trauma alone to really do something to you mentally. Yeah. So find those moments to disengage, find those moments to breathe, meditate. I do yoga for my own peace of mind. Find those moments to talk to people who you can just yell at it, scream and yell and cry with, and who's going to understand that. For Breonna Taylor's birthday, a group of my friends, we just got together and we had lunch in the park to just, honor her. And we didn't do a big rally or anything like that. We were just like, hey, we're going to get some happy birthday balloons, some cupcakes. We're going to get our chairs. We're going to social distance, get in the park. We're just going to honor her and her life. So don't feel bad that in this moment, you also have to put your mental health at the forefront, because if you don't, you will exert yourself to the point where you can't, where this will just become a moment. Yeah. And it won't become a movement, because we exhausted ourselves at the beginning that we weren't able to sustain over a long period of time. So for anyone watching, be okay with reaching out to your counselors, be okay with reaching out to others who understand how you're feeling, feel okay with crying, feeling that pain, feeling reaching out to other people, making sure they're okay. Know that it's okay, to feel and be in that, and then heal from it how you can heal from it.
Well said. I mean, me and Christopher always said, it's okay to not be okay.
Yes.
Recognize that you're not okay. And I'm going to throw another Pugh'ism at you, Carl. I always say, your perception is not my reality. You may perceive me as doing really well. This brother got 3 coffee houses, the fat crib, he got loot. Everybody think that. But my reality is I'm in the inside hurting, crying, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. I got all them emotions like that. But when me and Chris talk, man, are you all right? No, are you really okay?
Yeah.
What's going on with you emotionally, physically? How's your relationship? We run it down to each other, and then we'll start being honest. Sometimes we get kind of emotional. Hey, man, this is what's going on with me, bro. But some people, hey, how you doing? I'm good. They're really not good, because your perception is not their reality.
That's real. The thing I would say is that, I can't front, when I started seeing all the images, like, it made me really, really uncomfortable. I fought fear, not the type of fear where I'm just afraid of everything that's happened in life. I think I was just triggered, right? Like to see another one of my brothers, someone that looked like me, taken, and they can do it, right? And that made me feel some type of way, because it made me think about back in the day when they used to burn us alive in front of large audiences, hang us in front of large groups, and it was entertainment. And I feel that our race was just triggered all over again. And the comforting thing was watching other races also passionately, not those who are out there just for an opportunity to have a fake rant, but watching other races really rally and support, because it was sad. And I was a bit heartbroken, and I was going through a lot myself, trying to get my personal life in order, and to deal with that pain. That was a lot. But I still have to do the work, right? I still have to make sure people know that it's okay to open up. It's okay to talk about your fears, You know, like Trez said, like when I call him, like I asked him, how are you doing emotionally and mentally outside of just being busy with work? Because he's married, right? He has children, and even though they're older, he's still a man with a lot of complex stuff. And I believe that we should be holding our friends and our peers accountable, and we should be asking people simple stuff that's powerful, like, hey, bro, how are you doing? Right? We need that. So what better looks like to me, and I love the point that Angelica made, man, at the end of the day, it's like, how do we get to a better place in general? And I think what better looks like right now in this moment is that we're all being open, we're being vulnerable, we're holding people accountable, and we're actually seeing how we really freaking feel, because that is power.
Well said, bro.
I also just want to piggyback in our closing and encourage folks to create, like, feel you have the permission and even the duty to yourself and your community members that look like you or don't look like you, to kind of create a multitude of resources for yourself. Because there will be the days that your closest somebody needs someone else to hold them, right? And so find ways. There are multiple organizations. Hope for the Day is one. I told you about Surviving the Mic. A lot of these organizations do hold spaces virtually, in person. You know, we've all dealt with maybe varieties of trauma. So think about the stuff that has affected you, not necessarily just this little thing, this one thing that has happened in this moment. Even if it is systemic and it has been building up, if there are other sub communities where you have something shared, go find them. If you're a survivor of sexual violence, if you're a veteran or whatever, go find those communities. If you're a teacher and you know there are teachers that, you know, will hold space with you, right? Because there's unique stuff that you're going to be dealing with in those environments. Just find the multitudes, put them on a piece of paper or something and put it on your bathroom mirror. Remember that they're there. So that when your brother, sister, cousin, whatever doesn't have capacity, which is okay, we all fluctuate in capacity, you know, you have the next group. You can probably reach out to your coworker if you have built a bond at all before, you know, build those bonds too. So that's all. That's my piece.
Nice.
Did you want to jump in there before we close out?
AC.
Me? What?
I just want to make sure you get a chance if you got any closing remarks.
Oh man, I mean, sorry, I haven't really said a whole. It's listening. It's nice to hear you all say things, and a lot of the things that you guys are saying, excuse me, are a lot of the things that I'm feeling. You know what I mean? And Mike V, he'll tell you. I'll try and put it like this: like, I'm 41. And I've dealt with so much of, you know, dealing with police, if you will. So when the footage first came up, it's sad to say, but I was like, they got another one. And the only reason why anyone knows about it is because they actually got this one on tape. Trying to explain to people that this has happened so many times in my lifetime that you just don't ever hear about it. You know what I mean? You don't. And so the first day I was like, man, they got another one of us. It's, you know, by that third day, I was done. Like, I just couldn't do it. You know, they're playing it all over the news. Everyone's talking about it, which made me think of times when I had been, you know, messed with by police or thrown up in the hood of a car or just picked out or whatever, you know what I mean? And just brings all that up. And in my position with what I do with my work, you know, in a leadership role, I always have to be strong and like, yo, everybody cool, blah, 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 blah. But it's like the second I get home, done, can't do anything, you know? So Mike V could tell you all, like, it's good to just reach out to people and just be able to talk. Or just sit there and not say the word and just cry it out for like a good half hour or whatever. So I guess I'm saying in closing is like you guys were saying, like, it's okay to like talk about it, and feel a certain way.
Yeah.
And, and hopefully there will be more talking from everyone, all races, all genders, like people need to talk about it, ask questions, I know things, it's difficult to have these conversations, but until we actually start trying to have these conversations, things won't get better, and if, we're looking for that new better, it's got to be more talking, more understanding. So that's it. Round 2, I swear I'll talk more, promise.
I want
That'll be fine.
I cannot thank all of you, as our guests. I cannot thank you enough. For those who are watching right now and those hopefully listening in the future, something I want people to be able to take away from all this, because it's a very wide-ranging conversation, and Conversations Cafe never sets out to be the comprehensive one-stop says all. As with every one of the things that we post, we like to also promote the resources and information that our guests have, and we try to repopulate that, and we will be doing that with some of the great opportunities and initiatives that are here. And I've even been generating some ideas that if people are doing food collection type work, well, I know some spaces that we could help generate collection points from, and that builds the network. But there's some interesting things. The hope of the day as a leadership team, there was no question we were going to go head first into this thing, but people within our periphery had certain questions. And I mean periphery, people not directly, not our board or people like inside of the Hope for the Day team, but people on the periphery that we trust and, have an interaction with said, well, I mean, yeah, you guys are going to sort of be sympathetic to everything that's going on, but are you really going to talk about this? How is this mental health? Are you going to get political? How is this going to be, you're a nonprofit, you don't want to piss off people. Hope for the Day, you look through our social media, there are members of our team we've worked directly with cops. Isn't it going to be problematic? Aren't people going to, call it trueness? Because, a little known fact is that over the last 5 years, more cops have died by suicide than in violent interactions in the line of fire.
That's true.
Right on the head, bro.
And people hear that, and there might be someone who feels that they're of the righteousness enough to say, well, who cares? Fuck all of them. And if I'm not mentioning that part, we're not having the real talk.
Right.
But the reason I'm bringing that up is because Hope for the Day cannot and would not promote a political candidate. So somewhere in our social media might be a thing that we don't bring politics into it. But as a fact, everything is politics. Okay. And you cannot stand idly by in the moment of high tides. Moreover, more to the point though, systemic racism, police abuse, or abuse of systems of government towards economics, education, healthcare, or any other part is part of the mental health experience. You cannot live in this society and not be dramatically impacted by the realities and outcomes of the systems set in place that are either for us or against us. And it can be relative what you think is for or against us. Okay. And systemic racism does not need you to be a prejudiced person. It does not need you hurling racial epithets to be perpetuating and maintaining those systems. And it doesn't need you to be white either. Okay. 2 of those cops were persons of color.
Yeah.
Neither one of them had to be a self-hating insert. One was a man of a certain Asian descent, and I don't know specifically which one. Another man was a black man. They didn't need to be, they don't have to fit the mold of, well, they were self-hating guys, and that's why they did that. They could have believed and been as true and righteous in Black Lives Matter before that moment. All they had to do was see George Floyd as a perp. All they had to do was see George Floyd as not a human being crying out for pain. That's all they had to do, is they had to stand idly by. And so we're going to have more conversations, but I think it's really important for everyone who's watching right now and listening at home to understand that the Hope for the Day's place in these kind of conversations is exactly what Ms. Angelica Taylor said, and what everyone has echoed as well, is that our mental health impacts every aspect of our lives, and these discussions are reflections of that. And if there's another positive to come out of this, is that it's not just the outbound discussion about reforms to our society. Hopefully there's also an avenue for us, because if you think about the Black experience in America, so much of it has had to be by necessity built on resilience. And unfortunately, a minor byproduct of that resilience is believing in perpetuating an inner strength, an unshakable wall of endurance. And part of that belief in resilience and endurance is believing that your mental health, you won't succumb to those problems. But mental health is not a matter of willpower. It's genetics, biology, and psychological injuries can visit anybody. Yeah. And if there's another part of a better world, exactly as you've all prefaced it, giving us a chance to talk about our vulnerability, go on a march and be resilient to that level. But if we can also turn around and talk about the fact that it is okay not to be okay, that's a better that can save even more lives, young lives and older lives too. And so this is where we're gonna sort of close out the conversation for tonight. Hopefully today's put together a thing. We've asked our audience to join in and send in your own videos of what you think better is, because we want to hear your voices. And there isn't a qualifier that you have to be Black to send in a video. It doesn't matter what your background is. Share with us what you think better looks like. As we close out this episode, you'll see in the post videos 2 wonderful human beings who are sharing their visions of what they think better would look like. Alia Reichert and Michelle ThompkIns from Cornerstone, Chicago. And Alia Reichert's from Nature's Grace Wellness, and she's a Hope for the Day Agent of Impact. So that's gonna happen at the end of this video, but before then, I wanna say a gigantic thank you to our panelists, AC, Christopher, Trez, Mojade, and Angelica, and Miss Kemdah had to go to a previous time engagement, so she had to sign off at 7 p.m. Thank you all for joining us. It's been my honor to host this conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you to the producers of this amazing platform, Mike Vinopol, Rick Kasowski, and Vicky Cisnet.
Oh, yo.
It's not just my pretty face up here, but a great team of people at Hope for the Day who helped make this a reality. Right. So again, thank you all. Remember to take care of yourselves and don't be silent. Have a wonderful evening, and please enjoy the videos that are coming on next.
Hi everyone, my name is Alia Reichert, and I am currently the Education Associate for Nature's Grace and Wellness, a cannabis cultivator in Illinois. I previously was a teacher before that, and currently I also partner with Hope for the Day as a surrogate, and will be working with the Spark the Conversation program in conjunction with Hope for the Day and Nature's Grace and Wellness to educate people about mental health and proactive suicide prevention. Sorry I can't be there tonight in order to join you for this discussion, but I feel like it's very important that I at least was able to pass a message along. The current state of affairs is very scary. It's very troubling and disheartening at the same time. But I believe that with education and listening, active listening, we can change things. I think that there has to be some very hard and uncomfortable discussions and some very hard education to be done. But I do believe that people can change and understand how everybody is equal. I do hope that we can use our mindfulness and be present in the moment and not reflect back on the past, even though the past is extremely hurtful, and move forward and be cognizant of what we feel and what is happening around us at this time. I really feel that we have to have those hard conversations in order to make things better. And I feel that people cannot be afraid to ask questions to their friends or people of color that they might encounter in a positive way in order to learn and to undo what has been done for so many years. So, I wish you all the best. Please continue to be positive. Please continue to educate, and please continue to be mindful. Have a great day.
Here in Chicago, the poverty rate is at 20.6%, which is higher than the national rate of 13.1%. Now, we recognize here at Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health that poverty is violent. It is one of the most traumatic experience for a human being not to have the finances to purchase the basic food essentials. So here this weekend, we would like to feed 100 families on the south side of Chicago. Poverty is violent. Help us. Join us by logging on to cwhamh.com/PIV. We need your help.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Thompkins. I'm from the South Side of Chicago. I'm the founder and executive director of the Corner Store Chicago, a youth mental health and wellness-based organization. Our aim is to connect youth to mental health resources and creative art outlets. Through our mission, Manifest, Activate, and Empower, we foster an authentic and unique healing experience. Thank you so much, and a huge shout out to Mike, Carl, and all my friends at Hope for the Day for including me in this powerful conversation towards change and healing for our community. So what does better look like for me? As a mother, as an educator, as an advocate, and as a Black woman, better is recognizing that our community as a whole must have access to vital resources necessary to live a healthy and meaningful life. Better is having mental health care workers adequately supported in our essential social institutions and mental health care workers in positions of leadership to foster healing and hope for the next generation. Better is doing what is necessary so that we don't wait for tragedy to make us bleed even further. Better is change. Better is being open to the healing work, even if it means facing the evils that live under the rugs of our nation. Better is preventing emotional trauma for those of us who have been silenced for far too long. Better is normalizing healing. Better is manifesting honest, healthy, and holistic conversations on mental health. Better is activating resources that will further support the healing of our community. Better is empowering our Black and Brown youth by equipping them with everything that they need to excel and with the opportunity to soar. Better is understanding that we as a human community have the duty to speak for what is right, standing in solidarity with those who need us the most, and amplifying their voice and struggles and supporting and easing their pain. That's what better looks like for me. Thank you so much for hearing my voice. Thank you for listening to my fellow panelists, their perspectives, and their voices. Family, I see you and I stand with you and I love you. Thank you.